world has never been louder than it is now, louder in opinions, louder in ambitions, louder in distractions. Yet some people walk through this noise feeling strangely untouched by it, as if their inner life belongs to a different era. They feel deeply, think slowly, and listen carefully. And because of that, they often feel alone. If you have ever felt out of place in conversations that skim the surface, exhausted by constant stimulation, or misunderstood for your depth, this is not a weakness. It is a signal. Tonight, we explore why old souls feel lonely in a loud world, and why that loneliness may actually be a hidden strength waiting to be understood. Old souls are born with an instinct to look beneath the surface of things, and this instinct immediately places them at odds with a world that measures value by speed. Modern life moves quickly, rewards instant answers, and celebrates those who react first rather than those who reflect deeply. Yet the old soul does not rush forward so easily. Something within them resists haste. Before they speak, they listen inwardly. Before they decide, they feel the weight of meaning. While others ask what is trending, they quietly ask why it matters at all. This difference is not learned, it is lived. From an early age, old souls sense that life is more than appearances and achievements. They notice the emotional undercurrents beneath words, the unspoken tensions in rooms, the quiet contradictions in people's beliefs. Where others skim across the surface of experience, old souls instinctively dive. And because of this, they often arrive late to conversations, not because they are slow, but because they are thorough. By the time they are ready to speak, the world has already moved on. In everyday life, this creates a subtle but persistent sense of separation. Imagine sitting in a group where the conversation jumps rapidly from one topic to another: news, jokes, opinions, plans. Everyone seems energized by the motion itself. Yet you find yourself stuck on one moment, one sentence, one question that touched something real inside you. You want to explore it, to understand it, to give it space. But there is no room for that. The moment passes, the noise continues, and you remain quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because what you would say does not fit the rhythm of the room. Over time, this experience teaches the old soul a painful lesson: depth often goes unnoticed in a world addicted to stimulation. You may feel invisible in social settings, as if your presence barely registers. But this invisibility is not a reflection of your worth. It is a mismatch of tempo. The world is sprinting, you are listening. The world is shouting, you are meaning-making. These two modes rarely meet without tension. Psychologically, this experience is well documented. Research on introversion and high sensitivity shows that individuals who process information deeply are more affected by high levels of stimulation. Loud environments, constant social interaction, and rapid exchanges can feel overwhelming rather than exciting. But what is often misunderstood is that this overwhelm is not weakness. It is a sign of a nervous system and psyche designed for depth, nuance, and integration. Old souls take in more, not just sounds and words, but emotions, symbols, and implications. And what is taken in deeply must be processed slowly. This slower processing creates another layer of loneliness. In a culture that equates quick responses with intelligence and constant engagement with confidence, silence is often misread. The old soul's pause is interpreted as disengagement. Their restraint is mistaken for lack of interest. Yet inwardly, something very different is happening. While others are reacting, the old soul is reflecting. While others are speaking to be heard, the old soul is listening to understand. There is also an existential cost to this depth. When you habitually ask why, you begin to see how often life is lived on autopilot. You notice how many opinions are borrowed, how many ambitions are inherited rather than chosen, how many conversations exist to avoid silence rather than to share truth. This awareness slowly separates you from the crowd. Not because you feel superior, but because you feel out of step. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you have felt. And so the loneliness of the old soul is not merely social, it is symbolic. It is the loneliness of someone whose inner world is more real than the outer noise. It is the loneliness of someone who would rather sit with a single honest question than 1,000 empty answers. This loneliness hurts, but it also protects. It protects the old soul from dissolving into the collective rush, from trading meaning for approval, from confusing movement with growth. In this sense, the old soul's loneliness is not a failure to adapt, but a refusal to abandon the self. It is the psyche's quiet insistence that depth still matters, even when the world seems to have forgotten it. From an early moment in life, old souls develop a peculiar sensitivity to what is real and what is merely performed. They do not simply hear words, they feel the emotional weight behind them. In a world where social life is often built upon carefully maintained images, this sensitivity becomes both a gift and a burden. Most human interactions rely on masks, masks of success that hide insecurity, masks of confidence that conceal doubt, masks of happiness worn to avoid discomfort. For many, these masks are necessary tools for survival. For the old soul, they are impossible to ignore. Old souls sense when laughter is used as armor rather than joy, when ambition is driven by fear rather than purpose, when charm is deployed to avoid vulnerability. This perception is not analytical, it is intuitive. Something within them responds to incongruence, as though the psyche itself is disturbed by dishonesty. They feel uneasy in spaces where words and inner truth do not align, and because much of society depends on these polite illusions, the old soul often finds themselves quietly standing apart. This awareness creates distance long before words ever fail. While others connect easily through shared appearances, status, trends, achievements, the old soul hesitates, not out of arrogance or shyness, but out of an inner refusal to participate in what feels false. They crave encounters that allow the mask to fall, moments where another human being is willing to be seen rather than admired. When such moments do not appear, conversation becomes exhausting. Small talk drains their energy because it demands performance without presence. Shallow connections feel unbearable because they require the old soul to pretend not to notice what they clearly see. Over time, this dynamic can feel isolating. The old soul may ask themselves why forming bonds seems effortless for others yet so difficult for them. But the difficulty is not a lack of social skill, it is a lack of interest in surfaces. Old souls are not seeking quantity of connection, they are seeking truth. And truth, by its nature, requires courage. Many people prefer the comfort of roles to the risk of authenticity. This becomes especially visible in environments built on external validation, such as the workplace. Imagine colleagues celebrating promotions, titles, and recognition. The atmosphere is full of smiles and congratulations. Yet within the old soul, a different question arises, one that feels almost dangerous to ask aloud. Is this work aligned with who I am becoming? That single question immediately sets them apart. While others focus on upward movement, the old soul wonders about inward direction. While others measure success by visibility, the old soul measures it by integrity. This questioning can create silent alienation. The old soul may appear ungrateful or unambitious to those who cannot see beneath the surface. But inwardly, they are protecting themselves from a deeper tragedy, living a life that looks impressive from the outside yet feels hollow within. Many people only realize this emptiness later, after years of chasing symbols instead of meaning. The old soul senses it early and pays for that awareness with loneliness. Psychologically, this experience reflects a deeper truth about the human psyche. When individuals identify too strongly with their social masks, they lose contact with their inner reality. Old souls are less willing to make this sacrifice. They feel the tension between the persona and the true self, and that tension demands resolution. Even if it means standing alone, they cannot fully surrender to roles that betray their inner values. This does not mean old souls reject society. Rather, they long for a deeper form of belonging, one rooted in honesty rather than appearance. They seek relationships where vulnerability is not a weakness, where doubt can be spoken, where growth matters more than image. When they cannot find this, they withdraw, not in bitterness, but in self-preservation. The distance old souls feel is not born of judgment, but of sensitivity. They see too clearly to remain comfortable in illusion. And while this clarity can be painful, it also serves as a compass. It steers them away from lives built on pretense and toward paths that may be quieter, slower, and less celebrated, but infinitely more real. Old souls carry within them an inner world that feels vast, alive, and endlessly unfolding. When they are alone, they are rarely empty. Silence does not frighten them, it speaks to them. Their thoughts wander through memories, symbols, half-formed insights, and questions that do not demand immediate answers. They revisit moments from the past not to relive them, but to understand them. They sense connections between experiences that others might dismiss as coincidence. In solitude, they feel accompanied by their own depth. Yet among people, surrounded by voices and activity, a strange loneliness often emerges. This paradox confuses them at first. How can one feel full when alone, yet hollow in company? The answer lies in the nature of their inner life. The old soul does not experience the world in fragments. Feelings, thoughts, images, and meanings intertwine. A simple event may trigger layers of reflection, emotion, and memory. An ordinary conversation may awaken questions about purpose, identity, or direction. This richness makes their inner world deeply nourishing, but it also makes it difficult to share. When old souls attempt to open this inner landscape to others, they often encounter discomfort. Their words may feel too heavy, too introspective, too serious for casual exchange. They may speak of patterns in relationships, of unresolved pain, of the desire to grow and become more whole. But many people are not prepared for such conversations. Not because they are incapable, but because they are afraid of what depth might uncover. Distraction is safer, humor is easier, noise protects against self-examination. As a result, the old soul learns an unspoken rule: there are parts of me that do not belong here. Over time, they begin to censor themselves. They simplify their thoughts, shorten their sentences, soften their questions. They hide the complexity that defines them. And while this may create social harmony, it also creates inner isolation. To be unseen in one's depth is to feel unknown, even when loved. This dynamic is especially painful in intimate relationships. An old soul may long to talk about personal growth, recurring emotional patterns, or the direction their life is quietly moving toward. They may want to understand not just what is happening, but why it keeps happening. Their partner, however, may come home exhausted and say, "I just want to relax. I don't want to think." This difference seems small at first. It feels like a matter of timing, mood, or personality. But over time, it becomes a fault line. The old soul begins to feel that their inner life has no place in the relationship. They stop asking deeper questions. They stop sharing their dreams, doubts, and intuitions. They learn to keep the most alive parts of themselves hidden to preserve peace. Yet this silence comes at a cost. Emotional loneliness grows, not because the partner is absent, but because the old soul is no longer fully present. Psychologically, this experience reflects a fundamental human need to be mirrored. We do not discover who we are alone. We discover it when another person recognizes and responds to our inner world. When this mirroring is missing, the psyche retreats inward. The old soul becomes self-contained, but also self-isolated. They may appear calm, thoughtful, even strong. But beneath that composure is a quiet grief, the grief of having so much to give and nowhere to place it. Still, this inner world is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a source of creativity, insight, and wisdom. History shows that those who carried rich inner lives often felt misunderstood in their time. Their depth made them outsiders long before it made them contributors. The old soul's challenge is not to abandon their inner world, but to honor it without turning it into a prison. Loneliness arises, not because the inner world is too much, but because it has not yet found its proper audience. Not everyone is meant to enter it. Not everyone has the courage or capacity to sit with complexity. But when even one person is willing to listen without distraction, to explore without judgment, the old soul feels an immediate sense of home. Until then, They walk between two realms, outwardly engaged, inwardly alive, waiting for the moment when their inner world is no longer a solitary landscape, but a shared one. Loneliness often arrives not as a punishment, but as a consequence of seeing too clearly. When a person turns inward and begins to understand their own psyche, their fears, contradictions, hidden motives, and unspoken values, they quietly step away from the collective current that carries most people through life. Society runs on habits so deeply ingrained that they feel invisible. People follow routines, ambitions, and beliefs without ever questioning where they came from. Self-awareness disrupts this trance, and once the trance is broken, it is impossible to return to sleep. As awareness deepens, living on autopilot becomes unbearable. The old soul begins to notice how much of daily life is driven by unconscious imitation. Desires are borrowed. Definitions of success are inherited. Even suffering follows predictable patterns, repeated generation after generation. What once felt normal now feels strangely hollow. The old soul no longer moves simply because others are moving. They pause, they question, they hesitate, and in that hesitation, they separate themselves from the rhythm of the crowd. Psychological research has repeatedly observed this pattern. Individuals who engage in deep self-reflection often report higher levels of existential loneliness. This is especially true in cultures that measure worth through productivity, visibility, and constant achievement. When meaning is replaced by performance, those who seek inner coherence rather than outer approval naturally feel out of place. Awareness exposes the gap between what is lived and what is true, and that gap can no longer be ignored. One of the most unsettling realizations that self-awareness brings is the collapse of a comforting illusion, the belief that everyone else knows what they are doing. From the outside, people seem confident, decisive, and certain. But when you look closely, patterns emerge. Relationships repeat the same wounds. Careers are pursued without reflection, then resented. Happiness is postponed to a future that never quite arrives. The old soul sees this not with judgment, but with clarity. And clarity, while freeing, is also isolating. Once you recognize these patterns, you can no longer fully participate in them. You cannot chase goals that contradict your values. You cannot maintain relationships built on denial. You cannot define success by standards that feel empty. This refusal does not make life easier. In fact, it often makes it harder. The path of awareness offers fewer companions, fewer shortcuts, and far less reassurance. But it offers something else: integrity. Old souls feel lonely because they cannot unsee what they have seen. They recognize the shadow beneath charm, the fear beneath ambition, the pain beneath distraction. They understand that suffering is not random, but patterned. That many conflicts are reenactments of unresolved wounds. That much of what society praises is compensation rather than fulfillment. This understanding places a quiet distance between them and others, not out of superiority, but out of incompatibility. Yet this same awareness also brings liberation. When you see your own shadow, it no longer controls you from the dark. When you recognize your contradictions, you can begin to integrate them rather than deny them. When you understand your values, you stop betraying yourself for acceptance. Loneliness, in this sense, becomes the space where authenticity is protected. It is the price paid for not lying to oneself. There is a moment in the journey of self-awareness when the old soul realizes that belonging and truth do not always arrive together. To belong to the group often requires silence, conformity, and self-abandonment. To remain true requires courage, patience, and the willingness to stand apart. This realization can feel heavy, even tragic, but it is also the beginning of inner freedom. The old soul learns that isolation is not the same as emptiness. In solitude, something essential begins to form. Values clarify. Purpose sharpens. The inner voice grows stronger. What once felt like abandonment reveals itself as preparation. Self-awareness strips away illusions, but in doing so, it makes room for a life that is consciously chosen rather than unconsciously inherited. Loneliness, then, is not the enemy of the old soul. It is the threshold. On one side lies the comfort of unconscious belonging. On the other lies the quiet dignity of knowing oneself. And though the crossing is painful, it is also irreversible. Once awareness has opened the eyes, the soul cannot pretend not to see. The loneliness of the old soul is often misunderstood as a defect, as though something has gone wrong in their ability to connect. Yet this loneliness is not a malfunction of the psyche. It is a message. It arises when the inner life begins to demand authenticity over approval. For the old soul, loneliness is not a life sentence handed down by fate, but a signal calling them inward, toward the slow and difficult work of becoming who they truly are. The world resists this process with great force. It prefers predictability, repetition, and conformity. Society functions by encouraging individuals to adopt shared values, shared ambitions, and shared definitions of success. To belong, one must agree, often silently, to suppress certain questions and soften certain truths. The old soul feels this pressure acutely. Something within them pushes back, not in rebellion, but in refusal. They cannot fully surrender their inner truth in exchange for acceptance, even when the cost is isolation. This resistance is rarely conscious at first. The old soul simply feels out of place, as though they were born into a rhythm that does not match their own. They try to adapt to fit, to perform the roles expected of them. But over time, an inner tension builds. The more they betray themselves to belong, the more fragmented they feel inside. Loneliness emerges not because they are alone, but because they are divided from themselves. At a certain point, this division becomes unbearable. The psyche demands integration. This is the beginning of individuation, the process by which a person gathers the scattered parts of their inner life and forms a coherent whole. It is not a glamorous process. It requires facing one's fears, shadows, and contradictions. It demands honesty where illusion once provided comfort. And it almost always requires stepping away from the collective path, at least for a time. History bears witness to this pattern. Many individuals who later contributed something meaningful to the world first endured deep solitude. Artists withdrew from society to listen to their inner images. Thinkers questioned accepted truths and were dismissed as strange or impractical. Healers often discovered their calling through personal suffering. Reformers stood alone long before others understood what they were trying to change. Their loneliness was not a failure to belong, but a preparation to serve. The old soul shares this lineage, whether they realize it or not. Their sensitivity, depth, and resistance to conformity are not accidents. They are signs of a psyche oriented toward inner truth rather than outer validation. But this orientation comes with a price. To walk one's own path means accepting periods of uncertainty, misunderstanding, and solitude. It means trusting an inner compass when no external map is available. Yet something remarkable happens when the old soul stops trying to belong everywhere. The constant effort to adapt begins to fade. Energy once spent on performance is reclaimed for growth. Clarity slowly replaces confusion. The old soul begins to sense who they are when no one is watching, and what truly matters when applause is absent. Loneliness, once heavy and painful, starts to feel purposeful. This clarity changes the nature of connection. The old soul no longer seeks acceptance from those who cannot meet them in truth. They become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. And in doing so, they create space for relationships that are rare but real. When connection arises from authenticity rather than need, it carries a different quality. It feels grounding instead of draining. It nourishes instead of distracts. These connections may be few, but they are transformative. One genuine relationship can heal years of loneliness, not because it fills a void, but because it recognizes what is already whole. The old soul realizes then that belonging was never meant to be widespread. It was meant to be meaningful. Loneliness, in this light, reveals its deeper function. It clears away false attachments. It strips life down to what is essential. It asks a single, persistent question: will you become who you are, even if it means walking alone for a while? For the old soul, answering yes to this question is not easy, but it is necessary. And in that answer, the calling becomes clear. If you feel lonely in a loud world, do not rush to silence yourself to fit in. Your sensitivity is not fragility. Your depth is not a burden, and your solitude is not emptiness. It is preparation. The world may be loud, but it is starving for meaning. And those who carry meaning often walk alone, until the moment their voice is needed most.